Today I'm bringing you a build that brings tons of team support. You get blind on enemies, overshield for you and your allies, tons of unravel, tons of sever, and it's just all around strong. It's like 3 subclasses in one, and it's not even on Prismatic, it's on Strand. If you've been following my videos for a while, you may remember my Prismatic Mothkeeper's Wraps build, but this takes Mothkeeper's Wraps and puts it on Strand. So you can maximize some of the Strand verbs like Sever, which is buffed by the artifact heavily this season. And you can get Unravel thanks to the awesome Whirling Maelstroms, which you can see just shredding through enemies. If you're watching this gameplay, you can see it's just fly through this area. In this Legend campaign, we're 15 power level under, and the enemies can't really do anything against it, and they're just getting shredded non-stop. A lot of this is because Strand has got some pretty good artifact support this episode, so some of these things may not work outside of this artifact, but right now they're very strong, and we've got a lot of time left to play with these. And hopefully Strand gets more love, but right now it's still very good, especially in activities like Nether, where damage resistance and crowd control are king. That sounds good to you? Let's start getting into that build. I'm Engineer. So just going over this build's focus is to keep enemies blinded, severed, and unraveled while keeping yourself amplified and overshielded. And that overshield will also be applying to your teammates if they're nearby you, which is really effective. Sever is a 40% damage output reduction for enemies, and with Artifact you can get that up to 52% damage output reduction, which is insane. Generally this is great for support and add heavy encounters or mild bosses. It's really strong. Ran it through a dungeon earlier. It was very effective in the first encounter, and I didn't even come close to dying, especially in encounters that have mini boss tier enemies like the Subjugators and Sunder Doctrine encounter 1. It will just make them kind of stumble around. As you can see in the gameplay, I tested up to 15 power level under, and it performs very well. You have lots of distraction with your Threaded Spectre and just really solid damage, and the crowd control does a lot of work. So as mentioned, pros are crowd control. It does pretty good damage over time, not necessarily very good DPS, but it's a lot of just chipping damage, weakening those enemies. The defenses are very good. You can have Amplified up a lot, you have Overshield up a lot, and you can get Woven Mail on top of all that. The cons though, as with the Darkness subclasses, limited healing, so you're gonna have to look out for orbs or other sources of healing, and the boss DPS isn't huge. You're kind of limited to Silk Strike, which is a great super, but not the best for boss DPS, but still very strong, and I've had a lot of fun with it. I will mention too, I have a prismatic version of this build. There's a video on that already. Some of that isn't valid anymore because we have a different artifact, but it's still a very good build. I've also tried it out tonight in the dungeon, and it's really good. So definitely check that out too if you're interested in it, or you want a different variant, maybe something with a little bit more boss DPS, because that's where prismatic is a bit stronger. The key of this build is the exotic Mothkeeper's Wraps. This is from Lightfall, and you can get it from Rahul's Precision Focusing or Vex Strike Force as long as you own that expansion. And this is a pretty cool grenade. It fully replaces your grenade with a Moth Cage grenade, and you'll get 2 ability charges out of it. So the cool thing about this is when you throw the grenade, it does different things depending on where it is relative to you, enemies, and allies. If the grenade is near no enemies at all and just near you or allies, it will turn into Void Moths that will chase you and allies and shield you. And keep in mind, as of last episode, Void Overshield now has 70% damage resistance, which is very strong. Now, if those Moth Cages are just near enemies, they will turn into Arc Moths, and they will chase enemies and blind them and deal damage, which is really great. And then if the Moths are between you and enemies, relatively, then it'll do 1 Arc Moth and 1 Void Moth. Every Moth grenade spawns 2 Moths regardless, so it's just which way they're going to flip. These Moth grenades have a fairly short cooldown for grenades, which is great, and 100% flat gain factor. And they also synergize with the exotic weapon Exodirus, which will spawn Moths on rapid kills. Love this exotic so much, and it works on every single subclass. It's just has a little bit more synergy on some others. Now, for stat priorities, you want Resilience, for damage resistance and discipline, and then recovery, strength, and intellect just are kind of your lower priorities. Talking about the aspects and abilities, the first aspect is Whirling Maelstrom. This is just very good. Anytime there's a tangle and you destroy it in any way, whether it's throwing it or damaging it, it will turn it into a spinning, seeking, whirling object that deals a lot of damage over time and unravels everything near it. If you've played in Nether a little bit, there's an intrinsic buff to that activity to generate more elemental pickups. You will see a lot of Strand tangles, so you can make a lot of these pretty quickly. And if, just in case you're not aware, you can make tangles anytime you kill a Strand debuffed enemy. So we will do that with our melee in this case, but there's other ways to do it too, and we'll get into those throughout the build. Our second aspect is going to be Threaded Spectre. We have a few options here, but they just generally don't synergize with this build. But Threaded Spectre provides very good distraction. It will draw a lot of enemy fire to it so that the enemies aren't attacking you, and it's functionally like having invisibility, just with a different step. This decoy lasts for up to 12 seconds or until enemies destroy it, so can give you some pretty good resistance and cover. Included in this aspect, there are some debuffs to class ability regen, so keep that in mind too. It will be a little bit slower than you're used to, but dodge cooldowns are already so low that it's fine. Now your super, it's going to be Silk Strike. That is the only option you have, but it's a very good super. It's roaming, it'll charge up really fast. Your grenade is the Moth Grenade. It gets fully replaced no matter what you have equipped. Our melee, once again, is Threaded Spike because that's the only one we have on Strand, but it's a very good melee that severs on hit and has an 80% blackening factor. Lastly, we want Gambler's Dodge so we can get that melee back constantly because it'll just help us make more tangles. Onto our fragments. We want to take Thread of Generation for grenade regen. Anytime you deal damage, and we have a lot of damage just churning in this build, you will generate grenade ability energy. After that, I like Continuity because it makes the Unravel and Sever last longer, typically about 50%. Thread of Warding will give you Woven Mail as you pick up orbs, which is 40% extra damage resistance, which is very strong. And then lastly, I take Thread of Fury, which will give you a little bit of extra melee energy. We will generally get melee from our dodge, but this is a good extra way to get some because the tangles will consistently deal damage. You can also, in harder encounters or with encounters with bosses, take Thread of Isolation. So that gives you another way to sever by just getting rapid precision hits, so that's pretty helpful. Get that debuff. Thread of Evolution is also pretty good if you're focusing on Horde Shuttle from the artifact, so that those threadlings are 30% stronger. There are mods and armor stats. We are going to build for orbs and super, which is pretty typical. We want to make orbs on our grenade and melee kills, and we also want to make orbs on our weapon kills after using our dodge. We'll take an arc weapon surge because of Exterus so that we can make orbs there as well. And then we're taking hands-on and ashes to assets on the helmet to make super. Beyond that, we want to boost our weapon damage with arc weapon surges because we're going to be using that pretty consistently. Then we want to make sure we have recuperation for healing and time dilation and powerful attraction just to get those orbs back and make those armor charges last longer. Pretty straightforward setup. On the stat side, it's a little bit weird. There's a lot of stat penalties in these Strand fragments, so max out resilience, max out discipline, and then everything else just do what you can. You can see here I'm just a tier 3 for all these, and I have a pretty decent roll for Mothkeeper straps. I've also even had to tank strength down to 20 because I just can't fit the stats, but it shouldn't matter too much. We're getting a lot of ability regen from other places. Moving over to artifact mods, we actually have a lot that synergize with this build because we're using both Strand and Arc. So first, in column 2, take Unraveling Orbs. On anytime you pick up a tangle or collect an orb of power, you get Unraveling Rounds, which is just free unravel all time. You will need a Strand weapon in your inventory. You'll just have to switch to it. Usually I use like an auto rifle so you can just kind of spray that. And then over in column 3, we get Dielectric, which will give you Bolt Charge when you get arc debuffed enemy kills. So that will, in this case, will be from the blind. And then on top of that, if you can boost this, then you will also generate Orbs of Power and restore some HP and get some super energy. All that's great. Also in column 3, we have Disruptor Spike, which makes Sever stronger. Normally Sever's 40% decreased damage, and it goes up to 52%, which is crazy. You are halving the enemy's damage output instantly. So anytime you're using any Sever in your build, definitely take that. And in column 4, we want Horde Shuttle. So when you damage those unraveled enemies, it'll spawn threadlings periodically, and this is just great extra damage. Later in this episode, we will get a boost to this that makes threadlings inflict Sever, which just keeps that loop going constantly, and also lets those threadlings generate more tangles because that's an A-Strand debuff. Then in column 5, we have Elemental Supercharger, which will give us super energy when we kill those severed enemies. And then we have Defibrillating Blast. So as we get that Bolt Charge, we will also inflict Jolt, which just adds one more verb into our build. And then on top of that, triggering a Bolt Discharge will restore 55 HP, which is about a quarter of your health. So that can be really helpful in this build. On our weapons, your Kinetic Darkness slot, definitely take a Strand weapon for Unraveling rounds. In your energy slot, I absolutely recommend Exteris. It's so great and it makes more moths. You can read the snip from the Destiny Data Compendium here, but there's a lot of great things. It will give you free Amplified when you get a kill. And as mentioned, when you get a kill or 2 direct hits, it will spawn a moth with a 3-second cooldown between spawns. And those moths act exactly like the ones from the exotic. And if you have Mothkeeper's wraps on, it will create a Void Moth and an Arc Moth every time you trigger that. So it's really strong. Because it's on hit, you can trigger it on bosses too, so it's good team support. Lastly, in your heavy slot, take an Arc Heavy, just because we're already using those Arc weapon surges. Bittersweet's really good for a grenade launcher, and Watchful Eye, if you want some with a little bit more range from this episode, Heresy is also very good. So, always like to demonstrate with a little bit of a longer gameplay loop. This is the opening of Contest of Elders. It is about 10 power levels under, because it's been buffed up this episode. I'm still grinding my power out again. We are pretty much surrounded by scoring enemies in this and just not having a lot of problems at all. You can see Threadlings, you can see Whirling Maelstroms. Just a lot of damage, and you can see none of the enemies are actually trying to fight us because they're trying to fight the Threaded Spectre. So you get a lot of damage on enemies that they can't really fight back against, and they're not even trying to fight you anyways. So, really great. And all you have to do is just fire Exteris and get some kills. Because it's a special grenade launcher, it's going to hit pretty hard. Anytime you see those Strand tangles, just try and shoot them. One of the biggest difficulties with this build is just working around your teammates, because they will tend to shoot or throw them themselves, which can be frustrating. But if you can coordinate with your team, it will work really well and help you all a lot. See there, that Scorn Chieftain was shooting at us. We severed him with the Threaded Spike, and our damage intake just came down a lot. Pitch the tangles pretty far, and then just get those Whirling Maelstroms working. It's good to spread them out. You can see our grenade charge comes back pretty quickly. We have 2 charges at all times too, so those just keep coming back, and you have a lot of room for them. Another thing to mention here is that the Void Overshield does a lot of great work here and keeping us alive, gives us some extra damage resistance. And also just having Amplify, because Amplify was buffed this episode, we get 15% damage resistance, and enemies have a harder time shooting us. So a lot of good sources of safety in this to keep you alive. The boss is out. This is a boss abomination. He has so much health. We're going to grab a Strand Tangle for the extra damage. He's not even worried about us because, once again, he's fighting a Threaded Spectre. So I'll just wail on him with Silk Strike. Generally for Silk Strike, if you're not aware, you want to use the single target attack as much as possible because it drains the energy longer. Drains the energy less. But you can use the big sweep if you have a lot of enemies stacked up on top of each other. And we're just finishing him off with the heavy grenade launcher, Bittersweet. Once again, he's fighting the Threaded Spectre while we finish him off. So just great tanking with that ability. So just summarize that gameplay loop again. For the moths, if you throw them near enemies, you get pure blinding damage moths. If you throw them near yourself or allies, you get overshield moths, and between you get 1 of each. Exteris will typically make 1 of each when you get kills or rapid weapon hit. For damage, just throw the moth grenades out for blind, throw your melee on cooldown, or use Unraveling rounds to scatter Strand debuffs, throw or detonate all tangles as soon as possible, and just fire Exteris in between all that. And that's pretty much it. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward, very active, but very effective. It's good in encounters where you're moving around a lot because you're generating so many little minions and bits of damage, and you just always have abilities coming back. I've had a lot of fun with it. I was actually having a little bit of builder's block before this where I couldn't figure out a build that was fun or interesting or different. And this kind of struck me. And as soon as I played with it, I was like, yeah, that's good stuff. So give it a try. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. Just going to set this back on the build review as I wrap up. Thank you for watching. Appreciate all the support on the channel. hit over 1,000 subscribers and it's going really well. If you have any questions or any builds you want to see, let me know. I like answering questions. Also, feel free to join my Discord. It'll be in the description if you just want to discuss builds or see what I'm working on. A few things to note. I always have the dim link and the mobalytics link in the description, so you can always go check those. All my videos have full timestamps for every section of them in here so that you can easily reference them or flip about. The slides that I use to make these are pretty much like PowerPoint slides, but in Google Slides, will be linked in the description as well if you just want a quick reference without having to listen to me. I understand. So I do all that to be as convenient as possible for you. If you like it, just make sure you like and subscribe so that YouTube treats me nicely and shows my videos to more people, or just listen to the video in the background or set it so it gets to the end, because more watch time helps out. I hope you appreciate all that. And I know I've been frustrated watching videos before with how unfriendly they are to the people watching them. So I've always tried to be as nice as possible. With that, I'll let you go. Thanks. Have a good one.